When the Reverend Alfred Brown had time free from his missionary duties and teaching, he was still very busy with work about the mission station. He built a fireplace and chimney for the library. He loved gardening, which was a good thing, because the missionaries had to grow their own vegetables and fruit trees.
The 31st of July, 1838. Preparing to plant orchard. 1st of August. Planting trees. 4th of August. Gardening. School with the English children during the week. 18th. Pruning fruit trees, planting out cuttings, sowing peas and beans, etc.
Brown distributed supplies sent from the CMS store in the Bay of Islands to fellow missionaries in the Bay of Plenty. They also borrowed books from the library at Te Papa. Mrs. Brown trained young Maori girls to help sweep the floors, dust the house, polish the furniture, wash and iron the clothes, cook English-style meals with new vegetables and fruit that they had never seen before, make butter, sew and mend clothes. A visiting missionary, Richard Taylor, described her life. She rises with the light, she directs everything, for nothing can be left to the natives. She cooks, she bakes, she washes, she irons, and yet a delicate female, brought up and accustomed to live without putting her hands to anything. One of the more difficult tasks Brown had to undertake in 1838 was buying the land for the mission station on behalf of the Church Missionary Society. After lengthy negotiations, he was able to report,
"We purchase today the site on which the missionary station stands. This step may appear extraordinary at a period when the war may ere long drive us away from the spot, but it seemed advisable for the following reasons. First, the natives for the first time proposed to sell us the land. Second, it seems necessary in the present excited state of the natives to show them by this act that we have no present intention of leaving them. Third, the purchase money did not exceed £20, and the ground has been for several years occupied as gardens, etc., for the missionaries, without any remuneration having been given to the natives."
Very soon the original Raupo buildings were replaced with permanent wooden ones. There were no trees nearby, even for firewood, so kauri logs were rafted down from the Coromandel and landed on the beach. After being hauled up the cliff to a saw pit on what is now the North Lawn, they were sawn into planks, adzed and hand-planed by 2 resident carpenters. The first wooden buildings were a chapel and a small library, completed in 1839. Brown himself later built a chimney to keep the library warm and dry. The mission house itself was not completed until 1847, 9 years after the family arrived. Work was delayed by a fire in the carpenter's workshop, which destroyed tools and prepared timber. What an event it must have been to move into their elegant, brand new home. On the 3rd of September 1847, Charlotte wrote to her husband,
"We are all well and more comfortable than we should have been in the poor old house. You can form but little idea of its present state of desolation. Kavanagh has taken down all the boards and brought an abundant quantity of cobwebs and dirt into full view. I have taken all the boxes I could into the library, and have had the drawers brought into the hall, to save myself the trouble of going to and fro the other house. Our bedstead and the 2 wardrobes remain there."
The site of the original Raupo cottage is marked by a cairn on the North Lawn. Every day began with morning worship, with each member of the family taking turns to read a verse of the Bible.
"Everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven."
Mrs. Brown took most of the responsibility for teaching the children history, geography and French. Marsh enjoyed drawing and was very fond of reading. The children had pets, a dog called Hector, who missed Brown when he went away, and of course a cat. Celia wrote to her father,
"We had 3 kittens on Friday, the 29th of September, 2 blacks and a tabby. The 2 black ones are lost."
In 1840, Brown received a letter from the Governor of New Zealand asking him to get signatures on a copy of a treaty that had just been signed at Waitangi. Brown, just returned from 2 weeks in the Waikato and suffering from inflammation of his eyes, was lucky that several missionaries were meeting at Te Papa. They went to the local pa, but met little success. Some Mangatapu chiefs signed, but those at Utamoitai, led by Tupaia, did not. Celia must have inherited her interest in gardening from her father. When she was only 11, she wrote,
"The bulbs in the oval bed that Mrs. Spencer sent us are out. The 2 aloes next to the chapel are coming into flower and look like 2 heads of asparagus and are very beautiful. The first cabbage roses were picked 7th of November and the first damask rose came out 2 days after. The sweet peas were never so beautiful as they are now. Everything in the garden looks nice, but the weeds."
People who pass through the mission station have left good descriptions of the family. When William Gisborne arrived in May 1847, the Archdeacon was in the library.
Enjoying in a comfortable study the warmth of a cheerful fire, and busily engaged amid heaps of half-opened letters and other ecclesiastical-looking documents. The room was surrounded with shelves, on which large volumes heavy to carry, and, I dare say, heavy to read, gloomily reposed, while, from among, above and below them, long rows of tempting rosy-cheeked apples, brightly reflecting the ruddy fire, shone in delightful contrast with their more sedate brethren.
Some of the saddest stories about life on the mission station concern medical problems. As early as 1838, Anne Wilson, who was living at the mission station with her husband and 4 young sons, died of breast cancer. Brown records,
23rd November 1838. Our beloved sister entered into the joy of her Lord this morning at 5 minutes before 3 o'clock, after having, during her short but severe illness, given abundant proof of the depth and fervour of her Christian experience.
She was the first person buried in the cemetery on the headland. Some illnesses were unknown in New Zealand before the arrival of Europeans. When influenza struck the mission station in January 1839, everyone fell ill. Brown was up for 3 nights with his baby daughter Celia. Both Alfred and Charlotte suffered recurring problems. Charlotte had severe headaches, for which there was in those days no medication. Alfred had problems with his eyes, even travelling to the Bay of Islands to seek medical help. The doctor suggested applying caustic to his eyelids, which sounds very painful. Then tragedy struck. 14-year-old Marsh was sent to St John's Collegiate School at Waimate in the Bay of Islands in March 1844. Only a few weeks later, his parents received the news that he had suffered a blow. His condition deteriorated rapidly until he could no longer leave his bed. Bishop Selwyn constructed a waterbed by filling a large tin bath with water and stretching a waterproof sheet over the top. No medicine was available to treat his illness, which caused him great pain as the wound on his back grew larger and exposed more of his spine. Over a year passed before he was moved back to Te Papa, where he died in the Raupo cottage on the 14th of September 1845. Brown wrote brief memorials of an only son and established the Marsh Scholarship at St. John's College in his memory. The 1850s saw the gradual decline of the success of the missionary work. After the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, many more European settlers flooded into New Zealand. Brown, now in middle age, must have realised that his dream of a true Christian society would not be realised. Yet he continued with his missionary work and his travels around the Archdeaconry. But there was no shortage of company for Charlotte during her husband's absences. In 1851, Fanny and Susan Maunsell were sent from their father's mission station on the Waikato River to the care of the Browns. Sophia Baker, daughter of another missionary, also lived at the Elms for many years. Unexpected visits sometimes broke the monotony of daily life. In 1852, the Pandora sailed into the harbour. Captain Byron Drury, after whom Mount Drury is named, invited the Reverend and Mrs. Brown, Celia, and 3 other young ladies to dine on board. Ship's surgeon John Jolliffe noted,
"Most of them had never been on a man-of-war, and of course felt much pleasure at their visit. They seemed pleasant sort of people, and had more life in them than most missionary families we have seen." On shore at Te Papa, Miss Brown gave us the pleasure of some music and singing. The piano was a very good one, and the young lady played very nicely.
Celia was about 15 years old. Charlotte Brown left for Auckland to seek medical help for a respiratory complaint in May 1855. There, 10 years after the death of Marsh, and almost exactly 26 years after the hopeful and dedicated young couple first set foot on New Zealand soil, Charlotte passed away on the 12th of November 1855. With her death, the first period of life at the Te Papa mission station comes to an end.